My name is Abby Callahan. I'm 32 years old, and up until 18 months ago, I thought I had built something real. 12 years. That's how long Marcus and I were together. 8 of them married. We met in college, moved to Portland together after graduation, built our whole life from scratch in a one-bedroom apartment that smelled like old paint and takeout. I thought we were a team. I thought we were the kind of couple that made it. Then one Tuesday morning, while our daughter Lily was at school, he sat down across from me at the kitchen table and told me he was in love with someone else. Her name was Claudette. Her father owned Whitfield Industries, one of the largest real estate development companies on the East Coast. Marcus had been working with them for 2 years on a commercial project. Apparently, somewhere between the investor meetings and the site visits, he had decided that his life with me wasn't enough anymore. He moved out the same week. Our daughter was 9 years old. She asked me why Daddy wasn't coming home for dinner, and I didn't have an answer that made any sense for a child that age. I told her he was working. I kept telling her that for longer than I should have. The divorce took 8 months and nearly everything I had. The house was in both our names, but Marcus had a better lawyer. By the time it was over, I had walked away with a small settlement, a used Honda, and sole custody of our daughter. No alimony. The child support was set at a number that looked reasonable on paper but didn't account for the reality of raising a child in a city where rent alone could swallow your entire paycheck. My daughter was staying with my mother in Gresham during the week, 40 minutes outside Portland, because I couldn't afford full-time childcare and still work. My mother had offered without hesitation, bless her. "You focus on getting back on your feet," she said. "Lily is safe here. She knows where home is." I drove out every Friday evening after work and came back Sunday night. It wasn't the arrangement I wanted. It wasn't close to what I wanted. But it was what we had. I was working part-time at a dental office, answering phones, scheduling appointments. The pay was $12 an hour. After gas, groceries, and the minimum on my credit card, there was almost nothing left. The month Lily's school asked for a field trip payment I didn't have. I cried in my car in the parking lot for 20 minutes before going back inside and pretending everything was fine. That was the moment I knew something had to change. I found the listing on a Thursday night, sitting on my bedroom floor with a bowl of cereal because I'd forgotten to buy real food. Private estate, live-in position. Personal caregiver for elderly gentlemen. Room and board provided in addition to salary. The salary was nearly 4 times what I was making at the dental office. The posting said the patient had been experiencing significant behavioral and cognitive changes over the past year. It warned that previous caregivers had found the position challenging. It asked for someone patient, discreet, and committed. I applied before I could talk myself out of it. 2 days later, I was standing in front of a wrought iron gate at the end of a long private road in Lake Oswego, staring at a house that looked more like a small hotel than someone's home. Stone facade. Wide covered porch. A garden so well maintained it looked like something out of a magazine. A woman met me at the front door. She was maybe 45, dressed in a pale gray blazer, hair pulled back tight. She smiled the way people smile when they've practiced it. "You must be Abby," she said. "I'm Renee, Edward's daughter." She walked me inside without much warmth, heels clicking against the marble floor, and gave me the kind of tour that felt more like an orientation than a welcome. She showed me the medication schedule, the daily routine, the emergency contacts. She explained that her father, Edward Whitfield, had been a prominent figure in Pacific Northwest real estate for 30 years before his mental decline began. "He has good days and difficult days," she said carefully, standing outside a large wooden door at the end of the east hallway. "On the difficult ones, he can become agitated. He throws things occasionally. He shouts. He's asked staff to leave and then become upset when they did." "How long have the episodes been happening?" I asked. "About 14 months, she said, "since our family began the transition process for the company." She opened the door. The man sitting by the window was smaller than I'd expected. White hair, a cardigan that looked like it had been washed too many times, hands resting on the arms of his wheelchair. He turned when we entered, and his eyes went straight to me with a sharpness I hadn't anticipated. "Who are you?" he said. His voice wasn't frail. It was just cautious. "My name is Abby," I said. "I'm going to be helping you for a while." He looked at me for a long moment. "The last one lasted 4 days. I'm planning to stay longer than that," I said. He made a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been a scoff and turned back toward the window. Renee gave me a look that I couldn't quite read, somewhere between surprise and skepticism, and then excused herself. She showed me my room on the second floor before leaving. Small but clean. A window that looked out over the back garden. A real bed with a real mattress. I sat on the edge of it that evening and thought about Lily, probably doing homework at my mother's kitchen table right now, and I told myself, stay. Figure it out. She needs you to figure it out. The first 2 days were exactly as difficult as advertised. Edward refused help with meals, knocked a glass off his tray when I tried to bring it closer, and yelled at me twice to get out of his room. I picked up the glass both times. I stayed both times. On the fourth morning, he was already awake when I came in. He didn't yell. He just watched me set down his breakfast tray and said, quietly, "You have a child." I stopped. "How did you know that?" "You have a picture in your room," he said. "I saw it when the door was open." He'd noticed. I didn't know what to do with that. "Her name is Lily," I said. "She's 9. He nodded slowly, then looked back out the window. "Where is she?" "With my mother, about 40 minutes from here." "You see her on weekends?" "Every weekend," I said. "Every single one." He didn't say anything else, but he ate his breakfast that morning without throwing anything. It was a small thing. It felt enormous. 2 weeks passed like that. Slow progress, small victories. He started tolerating me in the room, then tolerating conversation, then eventually asking me things. About Lily, about where I was from, about what I'd done before this job. He never told me much about himself, but he asked questions in a way that made it feel like he was making up his own mind about something. And then one evening, everything changed. It was a Wednesday. I'd gone downstairs around 9 to heat up the leftover soup from dinner. The kitchen was at the back of the house, quiet at that hour, just the hum of the refrigerator and the sound of rain against the windows. I was standing at the stove when I heard the front door open, then voices in the entry hall. I heard Renee's voice first, then a man's. I froze. Because I knew that voice. I had known that voice for 12 years. It had been the last thing I heard every night for 8 years of my marriage. It had told me it loved me, told me I was its whole world, and then one Tuesday morning sat down across from me at a kitchen table and told me it had found someone else. Marcus. I stood very still beside the stove and waited. The voices moved into the sitting room. I heard them laugh about something. I heard Renee say, "Finally," and Marcus say, I know. The sound of ice in a glass. A chair scraping the floor. I don't fully know how long I stood there. Long enough for the soup to start simmering. Long enough for my hands to stop shaking. I turned off the burner and walked back upstairs without the soup. That night, lying in the dark of that small room above the garden, I put together what I should have understood when I first saw that posting online. Claudette Whitfield. Edward Whitfield. Whitfield Industries. My ex-husband had married the daughter of the man I was being paid to care for. The next morning, Marcus was still there. He came down to the kitchen while I was making Edward's breakfast, poured himself coffee like he owned the place, which I supposed he was planning to, and looked at me across the kitchen island with an expression I recognized. It was the same one he'd worn at the kitchen table the morning he told me he was leaving, slightly uncomfortable, slightly pleased with himself. "Abby," he said, "I didn't know you'd taken this job." "You didn't ask," I said. He smiled slowly, the way someone smiles when they think they have the upper hand. "This is a little awkward, isn't it?" "Is it?" I said and picked up Edward's tray. He watched me walk toward the hallway. "You know," he said, just before I rounded the corner, "you could have found something a little less." He paused, searching for the word. "Hands-on. You were always better at office work." I kept walking. But in my chest, something that had been sad for a long time was quietly becoming something else. Over the next week, Marcus made a point of appearing whenever he could, at meals, in the hallway. Once, in front of a contractor who'd come to discuss an addition to the East Wing, he laughed and told the man casually that I used to be his wife. The contractor looked at me. I nodded pleasantly and went back to what I was doing. I learned to read Edward's rhythms. On mornings when he slept well, he was sharper. On days after Renee visited, he was worse. More agitated, more confused, angrier. I noticed the pattern but didn't think much of it at first. I assumed it was simply the stress of family tension. Then one afternoon, I was organizing his medication in the cabinet by his bed, double-checking the doses against the schedule Renee had given me, when I noticed something that didn't sit right. The pills in the weekly organizer didn't match the prescription labels on the bottles in the cabinet. The dosages were different. The organizer had more of one particular medication, a sedative compound, than the prescription instructed. I took out my phone and photographed both. I told myself I was probably missing something. I told myself there was probably a perfectly good explanation. That night, I heard them. I was walking back from the linen closet at the end of the hall, and the door to Renee's study was open by just a few inches. I wasn't trying to listen. I just heard her voice first and then his, and something in their tone made me slow down without thinking. "The neurologist comes next week," Renee was saying quietly. "And," Marcus said, "if we stay on schedule, he should present exactly the way we need him to present." A pause. Then Marcus, lower. "And once they file the competency evaluation, everything transfers to conservatorship," Renee said. "And the conservator is me." There was a sound of something being set down on the desk. Then Renee, almost satisfied, "He built that company over 30 years, and he's going to sign it away without even realizing it." Marcus laughed softly. "How long?" "2 more weeks," she said. "Maybe 3. I walked away from that door so carefully that I didn't make a sound. I went to my room, sat on the edge of the bed, and stared at the wall for a long time. The next morning, I went to see Edward. He was sitting by his window as usual, but when I came in, he turned immediately, like he'd been waiting. "Close the door," he said. I did. For a moment, we just looked at each other. Then he said very quietly, "You've noticed something." It wasn't a question. I sat down in the chair across from him and told him what I'd found in the medication cabinet. I told him about the conversation I'd overheard. I spoke slowly, carefully, watching his face. He didn't look surprised. "I've known something was wrong for months," he said, "but every time I try to speak clearly about it, I can't. My thoughts get tangled, like trying to speak through water." His hands tightened on the arms of his wheelchair. "I built that company from nothing, from a single storefront in Southeast Portland in 1987, and now my own daughter wants to take it while I'm still in this chair." His voice didn't waver, but his eyes did, just for a moment. "I believe you," I said. He looked at me like no one had said that to him in a very long time. "I'm not leaving," I said, "and I'm not going to let them do this." We made a plan that morning, the two of us, speaking in low voices while the rain came down outside his window. I had already been in contact with the primary care doctor listed in his original medical file, not the specialist Renee had arranged, but the physician Edward had seen for 15 years before all of this began. I reached out to that doctor quietly, described what I found in the medication cabinet, and sent the photographs. He responded within hours and asked me to bring the bottles to him directly. I replaced the pills in the weekly organizer with the correct doses. I did it carefully, methodically, making sure nothing looked disturbed. Within a week, Edward was noticeably clearer. The fog was lifting. He started reading again. He'd asked me to bring him a book from the study downstairs, a history of Pacific Northwest architecture that he'd apparently loved for years. He started speaking in longer sentences. His hands steadied. But we couldn't let anyone see it. Every time Renee came to check on him, Edward put on a performance that was so convincing it sometimes unsettled even me. He'd let his gaze go distant. He'd speak in incomplete sentences. Once, when Marcus came with her, he grabbed a cup off his tray and threw it against the wall with enough force to make Marcus step back toward the door. Renee had smiled. "He's getting worse," she told Marcus in the hallway outside, not bothering to lower her voice. "Right on schedule." I stood at Edward's bedside, pretending to fuss with his blanket, and caught his eye. He looked back at me completely calm, like a man who had been waiting his whole life to be underestimated. 3 weeks later, Renee scheduled the meeting. She called it a family and estate review. She invited 2 physicians, a probate attorney, the company's board of directors, and, I noticed this, a notary public. She sent me a note through the house assistant telling me to make sure Edward was calm and presentable by 10 o'clock. I helped him get ready that morning, button-down shirt, the good cardigan, his reading glasses in his breast pocket. "How are you feeling?" I asked him. "Ready," he said simply. The meeting took place in the formal dining room. Long table, heavy chairs, morning light coming in through tall windows. I stood near the wall beside Edward's wheelchair, while Renee stood at the head of the table and spoke for nearly 15 minutes about her father's decline. She described episodes of violence, confusion, and inability to make sound decisions. She showed the physician's documentation, records that I now understood had been built on a foundation of deliberately elevated medication doses. One of the board members looked uncomfortable. Another was writing notes. The probate attorney opened a folder and cleared his throat. Given the evidence presented, we've been asked to consider initiating formal competency proceedings, which would place. I don't think that will be necessary. Edward's voice was quiet, clear, steady. The room went still. Renee's head turned toward him so fast I heard her earrings move. Father! I'd like to speak, he said, and looked around the table with complete composure. I believe I'm still entitled to do that. The board member who had been writing notes put down his pen. Edward spoke for 8 minutes. He described his own medical history in precise detail. He named the medications that had been altered, the dosages, the timeline. He said he had been cognitively impaired for months due to the deliberate manipulation of his prescriptions, and that he had spent the last 3 weeks recovering under the correct treatment with the help of his original physician, who, he noted, was on a video call that had just been connected on the laptop I placed open on the table at exactly that moment. The physician confirmed everything. The room erupted. Renee was on her feet. Marcus had gone completely pale, the color draining from his face in a way I had imagined in weak moments might feel satisfying. And it did, but not in the way I'd expected. It felt less like triumph and more like watching a wall finally come down. The probate attorney was already on the phone. One of the board members looked directly at Renee and said, "We need to pause this meeting immediately and involve counsel." Security arrived before Marcus and Renee had finished arguing. 2 men in blazers who asked them very calmly to gather their things and step outside. A police detective, a woman named Harmon who had been briefed in advance, was waiting in the entry hall. I had spoken to her 4 days earlier. She had been thorough and patient and had asked me to write everything down, which I had. I watched them walk out. Marcus turned once and looked at me across the entry hall. I don't know what he expected to see on my face. Whatever it was, I don't think he found it. The room settled into a different kind of quiet after they were gone. Edward asked me to come stand beside him. I did, and he put his hand briefly over mine on the arm of his wheelchair. "You know," he said, "I interviewed 9 caregivers before you." "I know," I said. "You told me." "None of them stayed past day 5. He looked at me sideways, something like dry humor in his expression. "You're stubborn." "I had reasons to stay," I said. He nodded slowly. "You did, and so did I." 2 days later, his personal attorney came to the house. I was in the kitchen when the house assistant came to find me. The attorney was a compact man in his 60s named Hargrove, who had apparently known Edward for 20 years. He asked me to sit down. He set a folder on the table between us and folded his hands over it. Edward, he explained, had made specific decisions about his estate that he wished to execute now. While his competency was fully documented and unimpeachable, he had placed a significant portion of his personal assets, not the company, which would pass to a professional board trustee, into a private trust. That trust had been designated to me. I sat very still. The number he told me was not something I'll write here because it still doesn't feel entirely real. But it was enough. More than enough. Enough for a house. Enough for Lily's school. Enough for the years ahead that had been looking so uncertain for so long. "Mr. Whitfield would like me to tell you something," Hargrove said, closing the folder. "He said you stayed when everyone else left. He wants you to be able to stay, wherever you choose to be, for the rest of your life." I didn't cry until I was back in my small room above the garden, sitting on the edge of that bed, holding my phone with Lily's school photo as my wallpaper. I called my mother that evening. She answered on the second ring, as she always does. "Is everything okay?" she asked. "Yeah," I said. "Actually, yes, I think we're going to be okay." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Lily's right here. Do you want to talk to her?" And my daughter's voice came on the line, bright and loud and completely unconcerned with all of it, telling me about a song they'd learned in music class and asking if I was coming Friday. And I sat there on that bed in that quiet room and said yes. Yes, I was coming Friday. Yes, I'd be there. I had walked into that house as a woman with almost nothing, trying to keep my head above water long enough to take care of the person who needed me most. I had not walked in looking for a second chance. I wasn't thinking about justice or karma or any of the things people say when stories like this get wrapped up neatly at the end. I was just trying to stay. And sometimes it turns out that's exactly enough. I think about Edward's hands a lot. The way they gripped the arms of his wheelchair that morning when he said, quietly, "They're trying to make me look insane." He wasn't asking for help. He wasn't even sure I would believe him. He was just saying the truth out loud to the only person in that house who might be listening. And I was listening, not because I'm especially brave or especially good. I was listening because I had nothing left to lose by paying attention. That's the thing nobody tells you about hitting rock bottom. It clears out the noise. When Marcus left and took most of what we built together, I spent weeks feeling like I had failed at everything that mattered. But somewhere underneath all of that, something got simpler. I stopped worrying about what looked right or what was comfortable. I just started paying attention to what was actually true. That's what I think saved Edward. Not me specifically, but the willingness to look clearly at what was in front of me and not explain it away. The medication dosages didn't match. The pattern after Renee's visits was consistent. The overheard conversation meant exactly what it sounded like it meant. I didn't have a legal background or a medical degree. I had eyes and the sense to use them, being sharp enough to notice, and honest enough to act on what I noticed. That turned out to matter more than anything else I could have brought to that job. But noticing something true isn't enough on its own. You have to be willing to do something uncomfortable with it. I could have told myself it wasn't my business. I could have decided the risk wasn't worth it, that speaking up might cost me the job, the income, the roof over my head while Lily was waiting for me in Gresham every Friday. And the old version of me, the one who had spent 12 years making herself smaller to keep the peace, might have done exactly that. I didn't. Not because I'd suddenly become fearless, but because I had already lost the thing I was most afraid of losing, the life I thought I was building, and I was still standing. That changes you. It teaches you that you're more durable than you believed. And once you know that, once you've actually tested it, it becomes harder to justify staying quiet when something is wrong. What Marcus and Renee were doing to Edward was wrong. A man had spent 30 years building something real, and the people closest to him were quietly dismantling his mind to take it. The wrongness of that was so clear it cut through everything else. My fear, my exhaustion, my financial desperation. Some things just don't require a complicated moral calculation. You either help or you don't. I helped. And the outcome was not something I engineered. I didn't walk into that estate looking for a windfall or a second chance or justice for what Marcus had done to me. I walked in because my daughter needed her school fees paid and I was out of options. Everything that followed came from just doing the right thing, one small decision at a time. Replacing the pills carefully, contacting Edward's real doctor, speaking to Detective Harmon when I was scared and unsure of myself. None of those moments felt heroic. They felt like the only moves available to someone trying to act with a clear conscience. I used to think that integrity was something you displayed when things were going well. I know now that it only really means anything when it costs you something to hold on to it. Lily asked me once, a few months after everything settled, why I had stayed at that job when it was so hard. She's 10 now. She asked the kind of questions that deserve real answers. I told her because someone needed help, and I was the person who happened to be there. She thought about that for a second and then said, "So you just didn't quit?" "Yeah," I said. "I just didn't quit." Sometimes that's the whole story.